The opium poppy is a lucrative crop that has to be grown under strict security. And for that reason, the Australian poppy industry has been restricted to Tasmania, well away from major population centres. But that 40-year-old Tasmanian monopoly looks set to end. Victoria is paving the way for farmers to plant the narcotic crop, in part due to the growing international demand from pharmaceutical companies. Fiona Breen reports.
It's perfect dry weather for harvesting poppies. Every last trace of moisture needs to evaporate from the pod at the top of the stem before the harvest can begin. Each pod contains opiate alkaloid, the main ingredient in painkillers.
Main thing I watch for is not to get too much straw into the harvester. Farmers don't get paid for straw, and you'll notice there is a few small capsules left in the field, but if we go down to get those, we get more straw and dilutes the sample and the farmer loses out.
Malcolm Brown has been doing this for 40 years, working entirely in Tasmania, the only state where poppies can be commercially grown. In the 1970s, state and federal governments gave Tasmania the monopoly. The reasoning? To keep opium away from the main population centres and the illegal drug industry. Some people still believe it should stay that way.
Tasmania is a unique place to grow under the treaty because it is constrained in its geography, but for many other reasons. From a security point of view, Tasmania has one of the most settled populations in the world, second to Iceland in terms of its stability. Because of Tasmania's accelerated ageing, we have a median age now which is approaching 42. We have a very law-abiding state. Crime is actually falling, and the interferences with the drug are rapidly falling. You introduce a narcotic drug into another place in a big rush, then you could have all sorts of unfortunate consequences.
Even so, the $120 million Tasmanian poppy industry has had its security problems. Crops line the highways protected by simple fences. The occasional sign warns against stealing. Last year, nearly 3,000 poppies were taken from millions grown across the state. There's usually a poppy-related death every couple of years, but in recent times there's been 3 deaths in 3 years. A young Danish tourist died this week.
It's popular in a lot of countries, and it had been seen in the past to be a relatively safe way to get high. However, poppies that are used for poppy tea are not the same as those that are used in Tasmania. Poppy tea is now a bit of a gamble, and particularly in Tasmania.
It's a security headache that Tasmania looks set to share with other states as its monopoly falls apart. The 3 poppy companies, international pharmaceutical giants GlaxoSmithKline and Johnson & Johnson's Tas Alkaloids and the Australian-owned TPI Enterprises, have been trialling poppies in Victoria and are pushing to grow them commercially.
We've had a situation in Tasmania where we've been restricted to Tasmania now for 40 years. And in that time, in 40 years, the market has changed remarkably. The competitive environment, what customers want is totally changed. Their demands are different. We need to grow in Victoria to demonstrate that we have the most secure supply chain in the industry. That's why we took the step, the commercial step, and the political step to go forward and try and lobby for Victorian growing, and we believe we've been successful in that.
TPI Enterprises is also seeking permission to grow up to 500 hectares in the Northern Territory. The pharmaceutical companies say their customers are demanding they hedge their bets and take out the risk that comes with growing in one region. The Victorian government is enthusiastic. It's set up new laws to smooth the way. Minister Peter Walsh dismisses concerns about crop security.
Well, I don't think best straight is necessarily a moat that stops organised crime going anywhere. So I think it's about having the right regulatory framework in place, which we will have here in Victoria, and the people that will be involved in the industry will be obviously very, very diligent about making sure there is nothing that goes wrong.
Demand for opiate-based medications made from the poppies is booming, more than doubling in 10 years. Australia is one of a handful of countries with United Nations approval to grow poppies. The Victorian government would love a slice of that pie.
Very keen. We've worked with the three processors to have the trials, and we've fast-tracked getting the regulatory regime through the Parliament, get the legislation in place so that they can actually start commercial production this winter.
This is one of 6 trial crops of poppies in Victoria, planted for the pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline. They're all in secret locations, and there are strict rules about who's allowed into the fence plot. We're not allowed inside the fence. The company says it's to avoid any chance of the poppies falling into the wrong hands.
Well, essentially what we're doing is growing a narcotic plant, so that's, that is illegal. We're operating under a specific permit from the Victorian government, and conditions attached to that were fairly strict on keeping things under wraps and minimising any problems and any complications.
Tom Lovelace is running the trials for GlaxoSmithKline. His crew planted 3 different types of poppies in 1,300 plots across June and September. All up, he has about a hectare of poppies growing in small plots from the north to the south.
The plant growth in some sites has been very promising and looking really, really, really good. The plants themselves have grown in all the sites, so they've been successfully able to be grown and cultivated.
This crop near Ballarat is one of the last to be harvested. From an agricultural point of view, Tom Lovelace couldn't be happier, but the all-important results will come from a lab.
So what are we looking for?
We're looking for the chemical that accumulates in the outside of this capsule. So
It looks pretty dry, but there's actually a bit of chemical in there.
yeah, it's chemical that's within the capsule. Yeah, not a liquid as you'd be able to see it, but it's in there.
So the big question will be how much of the chemical is in this outer edge.
Yes, yeah. That's really what we're interested in. It's like any other crop, whether it's wheat or whether it's canola. It's the yield that comes off a particular area, and the yield for them, the yield for this, is the actual content of what we're trying to grow, which is the opiate alkaloid.
This plot is on potato country, just outside of Ballarat, owned by 4th-generation potato farmer Con Powell. He can hardly contain his excitement about the trials. He's watched the plantings with interest, as have many of his neighbours.
Potatoes have been the main crop here, and growers are always looking for something of in between, and there's been fat lambs and barley and wheat, but poppies, that could be very interesting to make an in-crop between potatoes. So that's exciting for us and for also the whole district.
Con Powell is hopeful poppies might be another cash crop that will help attract at least one of his sons back to the family farm. If GlaxoSmithKline has anything to do with it, the Powells could well get the chance to be part of a Victorian poppy industry this coming season.
We're not going backwards as far as our Victorian trials are concerned. We've invested a lot of money and time to ensure they're going to be successful, and we believe they will be successful.
Once picked, these poppies are off to the labs at the GlaxoSmithKline factory, where their assay or alkaloid content is measured.
What we saw in the laboratories today and what we perform in the laboratories here are 2 main things. We do our testing of our poppies, both our trials and our normal commercial crop, and we obviously test our operations here in Victoria to ensure that we're running efficiently and productively.
GlaxoSmithKline has always had its factory in Victoria. It's moved truckloads of poppies across Bass Strait each season for 40 years. It has the most to gain if poppies are grown in Victoria.
The transport of the straw from Tasmania to Victoria is a consideration for us. It's not driving our decision-making at the moment. Our factory is here in Victoria. It was here for other purposes prior to its being used for opiates. So while it's a cost, it's not a major cost for us.
You really want to grow poppies here in Victoria, and it obviously would be an advantage with your factory in Port Fairy.
That certainly would give us an advantage, but the driver is really around customer focus. Our customers are demanding from us that we have a very secure supply. We've been growing in Tasmania for 50 years, and Tasmania has been a fantastic place to grow poppies. But everyone who's in Tasmania will know that there's been some challenging climatic conditions down there. We had record drought, we then had the wettest years on record, and that did affect the supply chain.
Tasmanian Alkaloids has its factory in northwest Tasmania. It processes 80% of the world's thebaine poppies. The main ingredient in slow-release pain medication, demand for the thebaine poppy is rising. Operations manager Rick Rockcliffe is enthusiastic but pragmatic about his company's moves to grow in Victoria.
The main reason that we're looking to Victoria is just to guarantee our continuity of supply. I mean, Tasmanian Alkaloids, I think we produce about 80% of the world's thebaine requirements, and our customers are reliant on that, saying to us, you can have agricultural disasters. What can you do to alleviate that? Because we're so dependent on you, and we really think you should have a strategy to grow some in another area. But we're basically predominantly Tasmania. We've got a huge investment in our factory at Westbury, hundreds of millions of dollars, and you just don't pick that up and shift it somewhere else. So for us, we'll always be Tasmanians at heart, even though we might have to supplement our raw material a little bit from elsewhere.
The one thing likely to be in Victoria's favour is the state's relaxed position on genetically modified crops. Tasmanian Alkaloids has in the past worked on a high-yield, genetically modified poppy, but that research was put on hold because of Tasmania's ban on genetically modified crops.
My personal thing is I think that there's a lot of scaremongering about GMO unnecessarily. I think the science is very good. I think it's sort of wrong with those arguments that people are happy to have GMO medicines. They're already in existence, but they're sort of all hung up about their food, and I think that's unnecessary. I think the advantage of GMO to mankind are so immense that you can't turn your back on that science. Those sort of people that are criticising are like people that used to walk in front of motor cars with red flags 100 years ago, and I think the people just got to get with the program.
Poppy Growers Tasmania is hoping after next month's state election, a new Tasmanian government will allow the industry an exemption to grow genetically modified crops. Although Tasmania may well be losing its monopoly, the poppy industry won't grind to a standstill. Many believe the island state is ripe to expand.
There could be more. There's a lot of land in Tasmania that's now been drought-proofed, where people haven't grown crops. And the poppy crop is something that is of instant application to a lot of areas, particularly in the south towards Hobart, where there are vast areas of land which are quite fertile and ready to go. Just add water and they've got a crop.
Jared Ritchie heads up the only Australian-owned company involved in the industry. Every spring he takes a chopper ride around his main growing area in the state's northeast. Today he drops in on the Mineral Banks property at Ringarooma, managed by Ron Berwick. Mineral Banks has 30 hectares under poppies, but with new irrigation rights due to come online next year, there are big plans to expand.
I can see this property probably growing, probably up to 100 hectares a year. We've actually got nearly 1,000 hectares of ground that we can crop on this place, so we've got a bit of scope to put poppies in. So we're pretty keen that the industry stops viable and everyone keeps going.
As the smallest company, TPI's supply is limited to where it can grow, and demand is outstripping its supply. The factory is not busy enough.
Being the new kid again, generally we get third choice, and then we have to prove ourselves, and then we get second choice, and in some cases some farmers only grow with us. But the industry as a whole has got 10,000 hectares that is available to poppies that's either Class 1, Class 2 or Class 3. The other 50,000 hectares is Class 4 that's marginal. So the industry as a whole has got about 20,000 hectares of its 30 in that marginal Class 4 land, which is highly volatile, a lot of risk. So we need to move away from that system. We need to grow in Victoria, we need to bring material in, and if we have a bumpy year in Tasmania, we won't need to grow as much in Victoria and vice versa.
On this fly-around, Jared Ritchie's nervous about this season's crops. Heavy rain during the early part of the season did affect sowing. Around Ringarooma in the northeast, they had 15 inches of rain in a couple of days. The ground was too wet and farmers were unable to plant as much as they wanted.
There's some examples where the aerial view you can see patchiness, you can see the effects of even a little bit of salinity. You can see weed very clearly. So we like to have a good look, and often it's the field officers, not me, in the helicopter trying to get a visual. You can get around. We can get to all parts of the state. Tasmania's ideally suited to helicopters. You can just see a lot of paddocks that normally for us to have seen what we would have done today is a full day trip, where we could still go and see crops in Hobart and be back in Launceston by the end of the day.
This shortfall in supply of poppy straw has forced Jared Ritchie to take a controversial move. He's just received approval from the Tasmanian government to import up to 2,000 tonnes of poppy straw from Turkey. He says it'll keep TPI's factory busy and keep people in jobs. But it's put farmers offside.
Well, the decision by Tasmanian Minister Green to allow it is extraordinary, because in 2013 there was an approval given as a one-off. Now, for whatever reason, that was never carried through. So to turn a one-off into a two-off is not something we're very happy about. It sets a precedent, it sets a message. I mean, the position of the farmers here in Tasmania is that they are ready, willing and able to grow poppies, and we can expand our poppy production significantly. So it's not something that we say is in the public interest.
The uncertainty about the industry has Tasmanian farmers worried. The Poppy Growers Association is planning to continue to lobby at state and federal levels for Tasmania to keep its monopoly, and it wants a ban on imports.
Tasmanian farmers have invested significant amounts of their own money and borrowed money in growing poppies. In the last decade, since around the turn of the century, the spending has been big, and it's been on the basis that we have a long-term, stable supply arrangement. What we want to hear from those companies that have the permission of the Australian government to export narcotics is that that stable supply arrangement is going to last, and we're close to getting the answers.
They may not get the answers they want. At least some in Tasmania are philosophical.
There's nothing in life stops the same, and farming's not the same as it was doing 10 years ago, and probably the next 10 years in the future it'll be different again. So I think we've got to move on with the times, and hopefully I'll probably get some flack over saying it, but hopefully that the poppy industry goes from greater things, because I think more people are using the products. I think there's plenty of demand for the drugs.